my philosophy when it comes to privacy. I think all humans have a privacy right.
Game on. Privacy.
Welcome to Game on Privacy, the show where we break down the latest in data privacy, AI risk, and emerging tech. This episode is brought to you by Prevani, enterprise-wide automated privacy and AI risk monitoring. No questionnaires, no installs, just answers. I'm joined today by co-host Jason Middleton, a veteran in tech journalism with over 15 years experience covering Silicon Valley and beyond. Today's guest is Kevin Morgan, director at a leading cryptocurrency company and a longtime observer of intersections between AI, privacy, and decentralized technologies. In this episode, we're unpacking the complexities of managing privacy in an AI-driven world, from building effective programs that can keep up with evolving regulations to confronting fragmented state of the AI market. We'll talk about real-world examples of AI in action, the role of user interaction and transparency, and how the EU is shaping global standards. Plus, we'll dig into ethics, the rise of data brokers, and what AI might look like in 2030, both in the workplace and in everyday life. It's a deep dive into where privacy, policy, and technology are headed, and why a proactive approach is more important than ever. If you're into thoughtful conversations about the future of tech and privacy, hit subscribe. New episodes are dropping regularly, featuring leaders and innovators who are shaping what's next. Let's jump in.
Hey, everybody. So to start this podcast series, what we're going to do is we're going to try to do a level set, because everybody knows that AI is not just fractured, it's growing, it's coming apart, it's coming together. There's so many things. We all hear it all day. So we got an expert to help us find our way through this, right? So we're going to talk to Kevin. And we're also going to figure out, we're going to build things off of a baseline. Like I said, a level set. What is AI today? We all have heard of Llama. We've all heard of Anthropic and the rest. But really, for real world purposes and for users coming up from our perspective and from Kevin's perspective from the business side as well. So I'm just going to ask him some basic questions to get started. Then we're going to get into a little bit deeper, because that's where a lot of the fun can happen and where I get to learn a whole bunch. Kevin, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Really appreciate it.
No, I can't wait. I'm looking ahead a little bit at the notes, so I'm getting kind of stoked for what's coming up. But first, I've got to get the fundamentals underneath me. From where you sit, you know what? Let's start there. Explain to me and us where you sit and your role right now, so we understand where your advice and expertise is coming from.
Sure, Jason. So I'm a director of privacy management for our U.S. cryptocurrency company. This is actually the third company I've actually built a privacy program from the ground up. And so I'm excited to be here. So I have a cross between cybersecurity experience, privacy experience, and I actually started out, believe it or not, as an IT auditor. So lots of knowledge with risk and controls.
Excellent. Well, that's great. Yeah. A lot of these things are like a Venn diagram that's going to overlap. And the other voice you just heard right there was me not introducing my co-host, Bill Porter. Bill, my bad.
Nah, you're fine.
Like I said, I wanted to jump in. I had Kevin on the line. But Bill, what brings you to the group today so we know where you're coming from?
Yeah, absolutely. Heading marketing at Prevani, one of the sponsors of this show. And we are all about helping companies fine-tune and really understand their regulatory risks. So we take an outside-in approach, and we will be essentially your eyes and ears from a software side, truly looking and think of it as understanding risk. We monitor your risk, essentially. Risk monitoring software. We will give you your privacy posture on an enterprise level, on a global level, based on where you are doing business. So if you're a company and you do business in EU, in the US, based on state, wherever it is, we will help you understand kind of where your known or your unknown risks are, and how to kind of cover those. So okay. That's where we are.
And that was a Donald Rumsfeld reference there. It didn't get past me. I caught it. Your unknown unknowns.
Exactly. All the unknown unknowns. Maybe sometimes these known unknowns. That's very, very deep on you there.
That's where I come in, because I'm pretty much the everyman, right? I'm smart enough to know when I don't know something. So that's why I want to be asking all the questions. Okay, Kevin, you started us off with you built from ground up. Now, how do you build something ground up when the ground is always shifting?
Wow. So first of all, just from a background, and this is where audit helps me. So in audit, you're always comparing your practices, or you should be comparing your practices to best practice. And there are several frameworks, proven frameworks out there in cybersecurity and business and privacy. And that's what I would consider your foundation. And you can compare those foundational elements to any kind of process. So what I started to do in privacy, let me see some of the unique and proven best practices out there that comply with regulations. They make sense. They're able to do the right things for customers, employees, and the environment. And so one of the privacy regulations I've used and simply use, very user-friendly, is called Nimity. It actually has been around for quite some time, over 20 years. It was actually founded in Canada, but has a lot of alignment to a lot of the international and even the U.S. privacy regulations in a nice, simple way. So in other words, let's take all the facets of privacy, everything from your policy posture, how you actually are transparent with your customers, to how you process information. So when Jane Doe wants a request for information, you know how to do it in an ethical and best practice manner. Okay. And so from those elements, kind of start building the privacy program and maturing it and doing continuous improvement.
So you're not having to build the plane as you fly it necessarily. You're just doing some you're able to have a plane, but you're doing aftermarket nuance to it as regulations roll out, because we're going to get to later in the show. We're going to talk about the regulations that are still being formulated, some of which are probably outdated and they're only 2 or 3 years old. So that's job security for you, Kevin. That must be nice. See, as AI replaced my job, that's how I see where this is going. Okay. Bill, did you have anything on that? I didn't mean to jump ahead.
No, you're good. I think I like you start with the base, right? You start with the structure. I think it's really interesting. So going into the theme of AI, Kevin, we could talk a little bit about this. How are you seeing the structure set up in terms of AI? I know it's still new, but how are you seeing that structure, at least the scaffolding, start develop?
Well, I would like to take a step back.
Yeah.
The way the term AI is thrown around, I'm kind of a Star Trek person, Star Wars, Terminator.
Love it, yeah.
Fiction. And so I like to use an example of explaining AI as though we're using Star Trek.
Ooh, all right.
So you can imagine Captain Picard. He wants to know about this new alien civilization called, let's call them the Flyterians.
Well, and that was, I think, one of the best series of all the Star Trek, by the way. I mean, there's a lot of newer ones, but that's can't go wrong with.
I'm going to withhold till later. Okay. Yeah, Picard was cool. I dig it. Okay, so the Flyterians.
Yes. Yep.
So, the Flyterians. So Captain Picard would say, hey, computer, give me everything I need to know about the Flyterians. I'd like to know about their social habits, their structures, how they interact with people. And, oh, by the way, if you could give me a summary, that would be great. And, oh, by the way, if you have any kind of phrases, diplomatic phrases I can use with them, that would be awesome also. So the computer will respond back, hey, Captain Picard, these are some of the information that I've read through millions and millions and gazillions of information on the Flyterians, and this is what I have with them. You want to be very proactive with them and direct. Do not give them any gifts. Those gifts may seem as a bribe, so give them a handshake. And in that example, the computer is AI, so they have actually predicted from vast amounts of data on this is how you interact with flightarians.
Yep.
And then with all the information it has processed, these are some of the interactions and ways you can socialize with the flightarians. So to me, that's kind of AI in a nutshell and a quick example.
Yeah, the sheer processing power and understanding to provide that answer, and then subsequent series of answers. So that makes sense.
Quick follow-up, Kevin. So you're talking about voice interaction with an AI, with an artificial intelligence generator of some sort. Doesn't matter the company, really. It really doesn't. But what if the flightarians only communicate through user interfaces? Can I talk to AI and say, hey, can you make me some buttons and an interface so that we can real time translate? Are they able? I'm asking if AI is able to code you a situation as well.
So that's interesting also. So again, just kind of going off of Star Trek, they always have the
translator. Yeah.
Star Trek Discovery, by the way, was the best one.
They always have that translator. So again, vast amounts of data in a foreign language, alien language, and say, for example, we only have a limited amount of information on flightarians, but what we know so far, they're very similar to another alien race that we know about. So maybe we can kind of predict off that other alien race on how we can socialize with the flightarians. So again, AI is kind of predicting in that situation, along with gathering and analyzing vast amounts of data.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Let's talk about voice for a second, if we can, Kevin, because what I mean by voice is what I'm seeing is something similar to, but bigger than social networks rolling out 30 years ago. In that it's a fragmented market, right? Like I said, we're going to talk about regulation in a minute because regulation always comes behind what this conversation is, which is the tech, right? Are we in a situation where we're kind of like in a new an operating system? Like, am I going to have 3 different chargers to have 3 different AIs? Like, do I have to have my USB A, B, C in order, or do I need to have, am I going to have to speak 3 different languages? Do I have to have any background in C++? Anything, because as just a normal person who looks at the AI newsletters that I get in my inbox every day, there are 5 new developments almost every day, And like what was one just this week? I think Anthropic rolled out a voice mode for something. Anthropic, by the way, which employs people who tells them not to use AI. So you can see there's a disparity. So help me get some signal to noise in this market.
So I agree with you. There's a lot of noise out there, and there are a lot of products. It started last fall, as you can imagine, just last fall with ChatGPT. So that was the biggest thing.
Right.
Then all of a sudden, who's this DeepSeek? Where they're coming from out of China. And recently, in our environment, in our company, we've just rolled out Gemini as a tool that all employees can use. And so I've used several of the tools from ChatGPT to DeepSeek to Gemini and some others. And in a nutshell, they have this interaction with the AI or the computer, and we'll call it a prompt. A prompt is nothing more than speaking English to the system and actually putting in the type of information you may want. Everything from ChatGPT, can you update my resume so it looks more professional and maybe get more hits on LinkedIn? Or can you summarize? And actually, I did do this a couple of weeks ago. There was a privacy document on the large language model. Someone actually did a research paper. It was 500 pages. So I'm like, I'm not going to read that whole 500-page document. So what did I do? I uploaded it to ChatGPT. ChatGPT, can you summarize with some bullet points or some action items that I can take away from this document? Bam. And so that's the beauty of it.
And were you happy with the results? What was it take like 2 weeks later? They came back to you with some bullet points for you to get in?
No, I'm talking about less than a couple minutes.
Sure. Okay.
Really, it's incredible.
Now, have you noticed any discrepancies across those tools?
It's interesting. Like I like to tell people, and you probably all heard the adage, garbage in, garbage out.
Sure.
Not that, there will be bad data. So in terms of bad data in, bad data out,
Sure.
you really have to put a human element against it. And it's interesting you asked that, Bill. It was we were doing a product comparison on some technology products. And I was just curious because I noticed when my manager used one AI system,
Yep.
came up with totally different products compared to what I had.
Yeah.
Right.
And what was unique, I actually used some additional criteria from some third parties. Some third parties already had a lot of research reports around these products. So I'm
Sure.
like, let me use that as a criteria in my AI prompt. And not sure if because I used that additional information for the
Right.
computer compared to my manager, but we did actually get different results, which was interesting. So it does take some checks and balances and say, does this really make sense before I consider it the truth?
Right.
Absolutely.
I
Yeah.
remember being at a developer conference like 20 years ago. This is where age actually does me good. And afterwards, we're doing the drinks in the lounge afterwards and everything. And then I had one developer say, you know what, within 2 years, I bet you we're going to be able to do interrogatives with Google searches. We're going to be able to ask questions and it's going to come back.
Mm-hmm.
So that basically is what you're talking about. You're talking about voice prompts. So we all got really good at knowing how Google works just intuitively by interfacing with it, right? So we got better at putting stuff in to give us more accurate and relevant results.
Yeah.
Now we're doing this with AI, but it's so much more powerful.
Yes.
Because you asked it for summary points. You're trusting it to go into a 500-page academic referenced and footnoted article and to pull you out reading point, and you're happy with the result. And as an expert, that means something.
Right. Well, and I mean, topical, Claude launched their voice mode just this past week it is?
Yes.
I mean, that's
as we record
now we're literally talking to it, right? As opposed to just typing it. So it's a very dynamic world at the moment, which, I mean, we could segment into the kind of business world now, but it's very interesting how we're defining this space as it's evolving quite literally in front of our eyes.
One other thing to piggyback real quick, Kevin, this is for you too. Some teams are rethinking how you even start talking to AI. Less typing, more showing, choosing, or nudging your way through a task. So this is already 2 years ago. We're just voice prompts, right? We're ChatGPT just last January. Yeah. And now we're already up to this. And I have to go back to you've been building these things for a while. Are there, without getting into regulation, unless we want to get into that, when you're faced with an enterprise client and an enterprise problem with this, how are you approaching that? I mean, because it seems like you'd have to have your head on a swivel that needs to go 360. How are you helping a client with AI and the privacy sector of something when things are still so fragmented? And that might be a bad question.
No. I'm very fortunate to be part of 2 global professional organizations. One is the International Association of Privacy Professionals, IAPP, and the second one is SACA. SACA is mainly risk and controls. Over the years, they have done cybersecurity and privacy. IAPP is their wheelhouse, their swim lane is privacy. And the reason why I bring both of these organizations up, especially the IAPP, they've done a lot of the legwork for our members. So, for example, every single privacy regulation around the world, if it's coming to fruition or has been enacted, well, we've already IAPP has summarized all that information. In fact, they didn't use AI for this.
Yeah.
But they actually used their staff to actually summarize. So I can tell you in the next couple months what U.S. states are becoming inactive on their privacy laws and how do I get ready for it. Okay. The same thing and the reason why I bring up privacy is easy because I've been doing it for quite some time. This is the same thing with AI. So there's several, the Europeans are leading the regulation in AI, and they're coming out with a regulation called the EU AI Act. And then there's about 2 or 3 states here in the U.S. that are really pushing AI regulation. So the good thing about that, we do have, from a member professional organization, we do have visibility around it. And we actually have a lot of smart people that, a lot of, those that are really in a policy regulation that have summarized it and can really push the organization, the profession in a good way that helps everyone out.
I see. Okay. So you're almost pre-troubleshooting in a way, trying to
Yes,
help anticipate what comes.
correct.
It seems
Yeah.
like organically we kind of already landed on regulation, so I think we should stay here for
Absolutely.
a second.
Yeah.
If I can just frame it up from the years of me doing business journalism, it seems, and it is actually, the EU is more top down when it comes to its regulation because of the market dynamics. It's always playing catch up to the U.S. market. So that means the U.S. market being as dynamic as regulation is always the tail that wags the dog, right? So where are we right now as far as, remember GDPR? I'm sure you do. I'm sure those letters.
Actually, it's 7 years this year from GDPR. So they're 7 years old.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
You can throw a birthday party.
yeah, right. Seriously, how many of us? Yeah, boy, I know more about GDPR than I know a lot of other things. So, but okay, so let's talk about regulation, right? So, does the U.S. market look to the EU as kind of like the beacon on the hill as to like this is a pretty good regulation? Is it live and learn? Is it throw things away? Can you tell us where we are with that?
Well, part of it, especially U.S. companies, and I'll take my company for example. We're international, we're global, and so we know that we do have a market in the EU. In order for us to play in the EU, to attract customers and increase our revenue, well, we need to play by the rules set in the EU and make sure we comply because we don't want to be fined or show up in the newspaper. So because of that, just like GDPR, I used to tell people, hey, as long as we're GDPR compliant, kind of feel comfortable in terms of the U.S. There might be some little tweaks here and there,
Right.
but overall, I'm comfortable with our programming compliance in terms of complying with a U.S. state law, for example, on privacy. And it's very similar concept that I'm doing right now with AI. Because again, the Europeans came out with the EU AI Act. There is already published. They've actually provided some guiding principles and documents that anyone could go and review and get a better understanding for it. Actually, it's a pretty cool tool they have. You can actually go on the EU site and say, hey, this is what my system is doing in terms of AI. Do I fall underneath the act? Or what are the things I need to comply with? And literally, you give inputs, and they actually give you a good output on these are the things you need to execute to comply with the EU AI Act. So they're really helping individuals and companies out in terms of doing the right thing.
A little more carrot there and a lot less stick.
Yes,
Right?
yeah, they will still have that stick.
Yeah.
Right. Oh, we've all heard about the fine.
Oh,
yeah.
yeah. Lots of zeros.
It's proactive again because they want it. Let's do the right thing. Let's do the right thing by our citizens, by our countries, and just make sure we're doing the right thing and protecting everyone.
This is kind of an esoteric question, but it comes up. Is there a chance for your company or any company really to put its hand up and say, hey, there's something the EU here that we could address that needs to be addressed? Does that help you differentiate within the marketplace? Not necessarily among your competitors, but like if you were like, hey, here's a tweak that we see that you could adapt from an EU, because the regulation has to stay as dynamic as the market, right? So is that an opportunity for privacy and cybersecurity companies to kind of differentiate? It's kind of like we see kind of what's coming down the hill and we'll put our hand up and say, we might want to be looking at this, pump the brakes kind of thing.
Well, let me give you a good example. What my philosophy when it comes to privacy, I think all humans have a privacy right. Unfortunately, I live in the state of Georgia. Georgia doesn't have a privacy law, and so when one of our customers requests what we call a data privacy request, a lot of customers, some companies will not execute that request. But if there's a Jane Doe here in Georgia and she says, hey, I want you to delete my information, I'm not going to tell Jane Doe to go pound sand. I'm like, Jane Doe, you one of my customers. We're going to take care of you. I'm going to take care of you as though there is a law here in Georgia.
Okay.
Once again, it's all about, for me and my philosophy in our company is doing the right thing by the customer no matter where they're at. And if there's no law there, then look at the most stringent law. And I use GDPR as an example when there's no law in the state.
Right.
And I execute on that kind of philosophy.
Well, and I want to pause and just applaud you for that, because not a lot of, well, it takes a lot of forward thinking and a lot of, I think, personal accountability to hold yourself for that and also your company to that. So just take a moment and thank you for that as a privacy professional to another one. Thank you for that. First off, just flat out. The other is it's really interesting. You mentioned, the dynamics of an individual in a state that doesn't have a privacy, privacy, what do you call it?
Right.
Law at all, right?
Yeah.
And how they can navigate that.
Mm-hmm.
Like how do we see that maybe progressing? It sounds like for the most part there's not going to be anything federal anytime soon, right? Do you think that Georgia may adopt a state level thing? It goes state by state, or do we think that it's just going to be it's just going to be like that for a while?
I think it's going to be like that for a while. Just personally, in fact, just personally, there have been a couple companies that I used to be a customer of, and me, privacy professional, I will ask for data subject requests, and they reply, "Oh, you're from Georgia. We're not going to take care of you." I'm like, "Well, cool. I will no longer do business with you."
Right.
It's that simple.
Absolutely.
It's that simple.
Well, and it's interesting too, because you mentioned GDPR, and we talked a little bit about the high watermark, right? So if you set your standard at GDPR across the globe, which is another differentiator, right? A lot of companies too will kind of split and say, in the US, we will only abide by the minimum viable standard of the US, and in Europe, we will abide by GDPR and make it very strict. Strictly speaking, because you could get away with other elements and maximize your revenue to a certain extent, right? Specifically talking data brokers, and when you're talking about sale of data, right? I mean, that's a big thing. And we can get into that kind of later on too. But I guess we can let's just kind of dive into it a little bit here. What are your thoughts on some of those kind of informal, formal regulations now in terms of data brokers and where they're positioned? This is completely separate of AI, but it just kind of came to mind in the market.
Not to be sarcastic, but sometimes I think the data brokers, for all the craziness that they bring into the market, because usually regulators are on them. They have so much vast amount of data, and the question is to them: are you doing the right thing?
Right.
Are you obtaining the proper consent? Are you using that data in a way that was not initially planned for?
Right.
And the customers know that. And
Right.
just my feeling on a lot of the regulations, it seemed like they are going after the data brokers.
Yeah.
And those that are kind of use vast amounts of data.
Right.
And so I just kind of noticed that over the years, just with the data brokers. And not to be sarcastic, like, I'm glad they're bothering them and not me. I'm doing the right thing, but those data brokers seem they hold a lot of power, and especially now when you can crunch the numbers, come up with profiles such as using AI. I mean, what's going to stop them?
Well, right, and that's I think how we can come full circle and tie this back into AI is when you can use that powerful machine, take anonymized data and possibly tie it back to a person,
Yes.
right? I mean, that's a scary part.
So you can have 3 or 4 points of information about me and not my name, and it won't be that hard to figure it out eventually,
Yeah.
given the amount of data, right?
Yeah.
So I guess that's a zeitgeist kind of question. Like data brokers, yeah, just in general, broad strokes, black hats, whether it's true or not. That's the perception. So you guys are in business adjacent to what is considered to be a black hat operation, even though, like I said, it might not be. But that's just like for those of us who are ignorant to this situation, coming to it just as a consumer, we feel like we don't have any control over our data. And if we ask for it to be taken back, and you might be able to take some of it back, but some of it's going to leak out, right? I mean, like my patterns and whatnot. Are we going to be to the point where we're going to have a U.S. version of the EU regulation generator, where you can go in and say, this is how I run my company, and then they're like, okay, there's a couple of yellow flags here, red flags here, or are we going to have to do this ourselves, just like we did with social media, except on a bigger scale?
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's it. Ultimately, it's going to be a blend, in my opinion. I think we're going to see laws coming through that are going to attempt to mirror what the EU is doing, right?
Okay.
The reality of the matter is it's going to be state by state. And what Kevin brought up, which is a really interesting point, is if you live in, pick a state, right? Florida, right? Wherever. And you are not covered. Florida man, right? That's Florida man is not covered by California law. So Florida man is out of luck when it comes to that. So it almost is irrelevant in that conversation. So you can have a law, but if you are in a certain state or a certain region, to a certain extent, it's not going to necessarily matter. Although there are certain nuances, right? So it depends on where the company does business, where your data is going. There's a lot of kind of murky waters in that. So, and Kevin smiled because he knows it, right? Like there's the laws are written in a way where it could be interpreted in a sense that Florida man may be covered, may not. So yeah, Kevin, I love your thought on that, because I could continue to ramble, but what's your opinion on that balance?
I don't want to be the sourpuss, but my mom always says never say never, and I just don't see federal regulation. I mean, it's just with all the things that are going on in the U.S., the last thing someone would bring up is a federal privacy law.
Sure.
So I don't know. I could be surprised. I mean,
Okay.
But I think I do like what you're talking about, Bill, in terms of a blended approach. Let's take something that's already out there,
right,
and try to tweak it for our environment, for our region. And that's what a lot of states have done, especially California, kind of starting out with the CCPA.
Right.
Let's try to borrow some concepts from Europeans.
Right.
And it was kind of from there, all the other states started borrowing from one another. It's like, hey, are we taking a concept from the state of California in terms of privacy, or from Virginia, or from the state of Washington? And let's kind of customize it for how we like to operate in our state.
Absolutely. And one thing I think we haven't necessarily touched on, and we're talking about regulation, is enforcement. Because without enforcement, laws won't necessarily be always followed, right? So when we're talking about the enforcement and the acts of enforcement, California's come back online pretty heavy way, following, especially around kind of privacy UX, right? So there's been some recent penalties, some relatively large penalties that have been around the privacy UX framework for companies. We're seeing some activity in Texas. We're seeing kind of these different hotspots, right? And it'll be interesting to see specifically with different states, if they follow suit with those regulations that are almost, I would say, bearing fruit, if you will, like actually getting kind of penalties, say, oh, well, this one is getting companies to respond in a way that is helping customers and helping in terms of actually protecting data. Maybe I will pick from that one and put it into my, regulations. I don't know. I could see that being something. And maybe that's a positive thing. At least for the consumer, that's a positive thing.
Well, sure, because a lot of us are, I mean, you've heard of low information voters. Well, they're low information users, right? And so the data we generate just by living our lives and doing our transactions is, so we're back to kind of Kevin's earlier answer, which is even better because we've kind of reinforced the ethics of it. Right. Your ethics can be a differentiator within the space.
Absolutely.
And not necessarily a code of honor or something like that, but it can be something that you can prove like, yeah, we're in this, we're a business, but at the same time, we're not exploitive.
I mean, the best use of this ethics is, I mean, the Apple campaign that was everywhere, right? With their iPhone and the walled garden and the security. I mean, that's the biggest, best security campaign I think anyone's ever run, and it worked, right? It's very powerful, very simple, got the message across, and that is a differentiator. And it just goes to show how powerful a simple message around "we will protect your data" goes.
Yep. Because if you feel powerless, that's when you have rebellions. And
right.
That's why, and then even if it's a modicum, even if it's just a Band-Aid on an open wound, it feels like we're doing something to protect us about the big bad data broker situation, ecosphere that we all have to be involved in. Anyway, sorry. Again, I'm the everyman coming at this. And you guys are basically covering my backside a lot. Bill, where do you want to go from here? Because we got into the regulation, and I thought that was really helpful.
It's very helpful. I think let's take a step back and talk about business application, because I think it's fascinating to look at how the business landscape has changed to actually real applications with AI, right? So, whether it's, companies using AI inside their own firewalls, whether it's people applying, cleaning up their applications and submitting to the point of, you see on like social media where they're actually using the phone on their resume on the interview, right? Where they're actually, recording and getting the answers real time to see like, what are you seeing, Kevin, in your personal view, or, in your network, let's call it, in terms of real application with these prompts, with just any sort of, let's make it, a little more specific. Let's say use of kind of that question answer kind of specific AI usage.
Well, I can give you a real life current example. Our company has kind of rolled out the Gemini AI tool, and our CEO said, "Hey, come up with a policy, and oh, by the way, use Gemini to create the policy."
Okay.
We rolled out to the employees, and we actually asked Gemini, "Hey, to develop this AI use policy." And they actually did a really decent job. In fact, we actually had to tone it down because and when I say tone down, there were things in the policy that, for example, having the AI governance committee. We're not there yet.
Right.
Start from the basic foundational level. As an example, we're not going to put customer data, even if it is our internal AI system. We don't want customer or employee data, PII, i.e. social security number, addresses, anything that maybe be able to identify a customer or employee in our tenant. Yeah. So there were some kind of guiding principles, but it was really sharp. And you talk about back in the day, we were going to do a policy. It would be weeks going back and forth for approvals, and this person would review it. And here is like, bam, let's do some refinements and like push it out. of course, read it to make sure it makes sense from
Right.
a
And
client, professional environment perspective, and then okay, let's push it out.
right. Well, and that's interesting. You mentioned a few things. The time to get it done,
Yeah.
the amount of probably hands that touch it, right? Um, the kind of devil's advocate in me, it's like it's you never like. Do you have a lawyer review it? Like, because you never know, right? I mean, I've definitely entered some prompts both on the business side and on the personal side where it gives you an answer and you think, oh, this sounds right. But then on deeper investigations, like, this is way off. Like, it's an interesting, I mean, as we know, this is a relatively new-ish technology. Like, there are some levels of learning that this vast machine is still doing.
Correct. And there probably are critical things that I would want a professional lawyer, either external or internal, to review.
Right.
That's a definite, especially when there are some state or international laws around it. So you definitely need to make sure you're doing the right thing. So that would be your extra set of eyes.
Absolutely.
Yeah. When you asked that question, Bill, the first thing I thought was, well, the lawyer's just going to put it into its own AI system. Right? So, I mean, help me out here.
It's just the different levels of metadata. Like, okay, it goes here, and then I'm going to ask this question, and then it's going to go from this AI to this AI, and they're going to talk to each other, and then it all goes to Skynet, right? We'll go to a different sci-fi metaphor. So changing topics because staying on employee level, part of a privacy officer's role is in introducing these kind of technology is, I think, also educating on kind of the rules of engagement. Again, in your network and talking to fellow professionals out there, what are some different approaches you're seeing in terms of how employees are being trained on how to use, how not to use? What are you seeing out there in terms of best practices?
So the best practices, everything from, I call them walk-arounds.
Okay.
As a privacy professional, and this just takes getting to know your company, get to know the executives and how they support you. And I call them flybys. Talking to the executives, I start off from the executives because my whole philosophy is lead by example.
Yep.
And your leaders in the company are going to lead by example. So if you have conversations with them and kind of be on the same page with them in terms of, this is what I'm thinking, what are you thinking, do you see any differences in terms of, for example, rolling out this tool? And I like, of course, to tie it in with what are we trying to achieve as a company in terms of our goals and objectives, and throwing that out. This is how this tool can be used in a way that's going to help us accomplish our goals and objectives and to take over our competition, and do it in the right way. And so when first starting those conversations with the leaders, and at the same time, as we and we did roll out the tool, so we had a communication to the whole entire company and said, here's some light training, some FAQs. In today's environment, a lot of employees are self-sufficient and like to kind of read. I've actually, a couple of my colleagues in different companies actually have customized training, short snippets, nothing big, or how they're using the tool. So it's a combination from everything from the flyby, going to executives, to having these short snippets of already content out there on training. And then some of my colleagues even took it a step further by doing some customized training in short snippets using AI.
Yeah, I was going to mention just this morning I was reading a story where an HR department at a Fortune 500 company needed to make training videos and used AI to do it.
Really sharp stuff. Really sharp stuff.
Yeah. And they were able to integrate, I believe it was Google Street View or something, so it looked like they were at different locations. seamless, very scary, deep fake kind of thing, but at the same time, very impressive.
And that's just the iterative work that is able to happen. It's impressive as well as
daunting.
Yes, that is to say,
Yes.
daunting, powerful, all those words, right? It's very, and as a, as a business person, but also consumer, it becomes this, it just builds on itself, right? We're talking about AI on top of AI on top of AI, and we're kind of joking sometimes. We're like, oh, you sent the lawyer, and the lawyer's going to use their own AI.
Right.
At what point does it stop? Meaning, at what point is there a manual check anywhere?
Well, this is why sitting where I am and representing who I am as the audience, right? Like, this is why it's important to talk to guys like you and people like you and with your expertise is because if you take some of the fear factor off of it, then there's going to be better adoption. Then we're going to see what's happening with it, right? Nice. So we didn't see what the long tail was coming out of, say, misinformation or disinformation on social media platforms for years. We didn't see any of that. We want to be a little more comfortable with AI because when you have somebody like Bill Gates, who's not necessarily known to go outside without a belt and suspenders on, says that we're not going to be having any more doctors in 10 years because AI is going to be able to do 90% of that work. That is scary because I'm a certain age and I'm still going to be alive in 10 years. And, and my kid is 16. I mean, she can build companies using ChatGPT right now. We've got to make people understand and be a little bit better about it's not all Wild West. We're not all trying to shoot each other in a circular kind of firing squad. We are privacy. We're secure. We're secure in our worry about security. Does that make sense?
It does, and it's an interesting topic to get into, and what we're really kind of fleshing out here, which is we have these regulations, right, which are mostly coming online. We have a technology which is rapidly developing, and we have a perception. All three are evolving at very, very different rates.
Right.
And where can we understand and mix things up? Right. Where do we collaborate and really define things? And I don't know that answer. If any of you know that answer, I'd be happy to.
I don't know an answer. I don't have an answer, but I can maybe put a bit of a spin on it for Kevin to answer, because I'm recalling doing all those interviews that I used to do on the talk shows about legislators getting caught with their pants down when it comes to social media coming out. Okay, and I keep going back to social media because that's the most recent iteration. We've had this back to the printing press, honestly. Okay, so but they don't want to get caught with their pants down again when it comes to AI. Too late. They already kind of have, in a way, because regulation is always going to be behind the marketplace, right? So Kevin, is part of your job as well is to, it seems like, not evangelizing necessarily, but I think you use the word transparency. Is it just as simple as saying that transparency is the best way to make people comfortable with this technology that is inevitable?
Yeah, so definitely with Jason, with transparency, because if you kind of think of it, AI is in the essence a big black box, and how do we get inside that big black box to actually take it apart to show the transparency? How is it making decisions, and how do we mitigate the risk of biases and discrimination? So, unfortunately, the systems were built by humans. We have biases, we have discrimination, we have bad things. So, and if you can imagine with AI, it can be amplified, those
right.
Risk and discriminations and everything in that decision. So with that, it is important for whoever with their AI system to prove this is how we're making those decisions. Especially, take my business, financial systems, or you're doing credit checks, and now you're going to use AI. Well, you're going to have to show a regulator how your system is making decisions and actually have test results around that. So you're testing those controls and having evidence around that. And so the more we have that, the more we push that, from a regulator standpoint, because the regulators will ask for it, which could be a blessing in disguise.
Sure.
Right.
Hopefully, it will push those that want to do the right thing to say, hey, this is how I'm being transparent. This is how we're making our decisions. And that will hopefully bring that black box out to be more transparent.
Right,
I hope that's the way it goes.
Yeah.
Black box is great because the industry is not necessarily known for opening the kimono too much when it comes to what's going on, right? So I think that's a lesson. I think that's a lesson that the industry learned, and I think you're embodying it right there, really.
Yeah, because a lot of these, think all the major players, right? There's a secret sauce to their algorithms that they don't necessarily always want to expose, but at the same point, in the privacy world, when you're talking about personal information, PII, PI, whatever, when you have to unwind things due to delete me acts and things along those lines, there's very strict protocol that you need to do. So if you're a consumer in a state, not Georgia, that you need to actually delete something, you need to be very transparent with where those inputs go and how to unwind them, right? So it's a very, it's a tricky balance of advancing your technology, advancing your business with technology, balanced with the ethical balance of the delete me and consumer rights, and kind of that fine line, right? Which
is it tricky, Bill? Is it tricky, Bill, because the data is winding up with data brokers and they don't necessarily take singularly identifiable data? I mean,
it's not necessarily that, and maybe Kevin, you can shine some light on it as well. It's more, think of it as when the request comes in to remove all of a person's individual data, right? The request goes to the company, and that data, it's irrelevant where it sits in your company. All of it needs to go, right? So if a company, for example, is using a AI algorithm to we were talking about this earlier, to say, okay, I'm going to try to triangulate all the shoes with the purchases in the US and figure out where the hot sales of purchased shoes, right? If their information's fed into there, right? If there's credit card information, that's personal information.
Yeah.
That in certain states that needs to be unwound, and that because of that large data set, that might be impossible. So it's a
so you're talking about putting data into the black box. Kevin was talking
exactly
about, and being able to pull some of it back out. Okay.
Yeah, I know. Kevin, what are your thoughts? Because I just that's kind of top of mind.
It's a left field question for sure.
Yeah, definitely. That's a really deep one.
Are we ahead? Are we ahead of our own game here? Am I asking? I have my own biases when it comes to this, Kevin.
I have a control. I'm always thinking about controls and risk and control.
Yeah.
And within a conversation with a colleague saying, hey, how should we build controls in an AI system if someone tries to upload Social Security numbers, the AI would say, hey, that looks like Social Security number. I'm not going to upload that into this big, fast amount of data. And so, again, anything is possible with technology. And I think those types of controls could be implemented and deployed if they're not already deployed.
Well, that's a very interesting point. And that makes sense, where you build in those checks and balances up front, where you don't have to run into those issues downstream. And that goes to the high watermark, right? If you are GDPR, if you are these California, if you are setting standards that are higher than anywhere else, you do want to have those, to use a really bad old school, like a firewall, right? Where you don't want to even start having that information going in. You can argue competitive advantage, you can argue whatever you want to argue. It would be interesting. I mean, you could say, well, you're at risk potentially for penalties. or do you maximize revenue, right? Like there's a balancing act, I think. And there's companies that every day, this is probably an executive level decision, right? Where they say, I will either pick one or the other, right? And there's, like we joked about at the beginning, there's the unknown unknowns and there's the known unknowns, or the known unknowns. Like there are going to be companies that will make these decisions and say, I am going to ignore XYZ law because it is in our best interest for revenue. And as a privacy professional, that makes you cringe. And I could see Kevin already shuddering, but that happens on a daily basis. And that is, I mean, it's more common than not. But then on the other side, you have professionals like Kevin and people that take this truly to heart and say, okay, our company is going to be at this high watermark across the board. And whether if you're in Georgia, we will still respect your delete request and honor every single right as if you were sitting, in California or in the EU, right? And it's a very stark difference in the market, and it's one that I really, really wish at some point there could be a general standardization in the U.S. Now, whether that's federal or just every state adopts it, I don't know. But it's something that hopefully can be addressed.
If you hear any background noise, it's not a power saw per se. It's my brain trying to process everything that's moving through this. Bill, how long do we have, Kevin?
We can do a couple closing questions, and we can move on. I think this has been tremendous.
Okay, good. Are you guys cool so far? I like the flow myself. I mean, okay, good. Real quick, Bill, side note, you and I discussed in pre-prep meeting about where there was one where you could do voice inputs, but it applies your own organization standards and guardrails afterwards. Is that something we want to kind of talk about here as far as like prompting AI to do something and then running into an unknown privacy or security risk? Or is that too weedy?
I think that's too weedy for now. I think why don't we start?
You want to go to 5?
Yeah, let's go to 5. Let's jump to 5.
Let's go to 5. I'm going to give
Kevin has no idea what 5 is, so we're just
5 is.
He's like, "What's 5? I don't know what 5
Yeah,
is."
I know.
Let's say.
I know that is my wife's favorite number. 5.
Hey,
that's a great way to end it then.
all right.
Line on 5.
All right. I'm going to give I'm going to give a few seconds here, and then I'll reintroduce. Okay, I think that's a great place for us to kind of start to wrap it up, and then we can get into the weeds maybe in the next show. Okay, the next show we'll talk about specific use cases without using names, that kind of thing, because we're all about anonymizing data, right? Okay,
exactly.
Especially if you guys, like, after the show, you tell me you want to delete everything, I've got to go find where it all is.
Yep.
So let's pull back. Okay, let's ask and close on a zeitgeist kind of question. So, first of all, is all the hand-wringing over AI worth it at this point? Are the upsides coming from AI going to outweigh the potential downsides from your perspective as risk abatement, right? Okay, let's talk about that. And then just pull back and let me know in 5 years' time, what's AI going to look like in your industry? Kevin, let's start with you. Let's say 2030 is around and you have built some templates and you are comfortable with the parameters, and let's say the regulation makes sense, which is not going to happen, but not at first. Okay, let's say we've iterated to a point where you're comfortable. What's AI like every day in 2030?
Wow. So for me in 2030, I would imagine that AI will still be, and I hate to use the word copilot, even though I know Microsoft is using that, but I do see AI as my personal assistant, my co-pilot, to get me through the day, to, from everything from work and also personal, using AI systems. So I do see the processing power getting bigger and grander. I've heard about these super data centers that they're now trying to build. It's amazing. I thought we were going to get away from data centers but then the cloud took it over. So it's not like we need this computing processing power. I don't know where we're going to get it from. Is it going to be nuclear? Is it going to be solar?
See,
But where are we going to get this power from
right?
to
Cold fusion.
process this vast amount of data and prompts? So I guess for me, that's not our problem.
Yeah. We'll hopefully solve that in the next.
But
Yeah.
I expect it to continue to be able to do more sophisticated prompts.
Okay. So infrastructure is going to be something that we're going to have to deal with. It's going to we might not be in the Star Trek world holodeck situation by 2030, right? Okay, because that takes a lot of power, I'm sure, to create a 17th century village that I want to go live in and hang out with, or 15th century. So it's Leonardo da Vinci. I'm just remembering some of my Star Trek right there. Bill, okay, he touched on infrastructure right there. What about societal? Am I going to get used to getting up in the morning and saying out loud into an empty kitchen, hey, what's the rest of my day look like here? Can you reschedule this and move this? Things? Is it going to be like a copilot?
It whether you're going to get used to it or not, it's going to be more of the norm, right? I could think of the adoption of the Ring doorbell, for example. Like that's something that I mean, when it first came out, I don't think, I joking laughed at him, like, okay, whatever. Like, why do you need a doorbell with a camera? And I feel like that's everywhere now. That's more of a normal thing than not. Yeah. But part of that kind of proliferation, wide adoption of it is the bandwidth of the internet as well, right? So to Kevin's point, you have to have the power, you have to have the resources in order to make it scale, right? So whether it's this big new data center in Dubai that they're spooling up, whether or not we're going to be able to, really actually do something in the US around nuclear and getting some of these things online, your comfort level with the day-to-day, I think, is going to eventually come with the adoption. The adoption is going to happen. It's going to be there. Like your kitchen is going to be some level of Jetson-esque, like prompty thing. Yeah. And I mean, I know I'm not going to be comfortable. I'm going to be that old man that's like, it's like Stone Age-ish. Yeah. That's, going to turn my own oven on and is supposed to like saying a prompt. But then my kids will look at me and say, well, Dad, why don't you just do that? But it will happen. I mean, I'm not going to say inevitable, but it will be one of those things that over time it will take place. And the real question is, what is that going to look like, right? Are we going to live in the John Ivey OpenAI world where whatever interface they've come up with for the billions of dollars that they would purchase him for, like, are going to create and they're going to continue to iterate? We don't know that world yet, right? But once that world starts taking shape, it will be really fascinating to see. I'm really curious to see where that inflection point happens. But I think adoption is going to happen really quick.
I think you're right. I think there's an uncanny valley thing involved. We started off joking about science fiction, right? Stanley Kubrick, 2001, science fiction. It's all coming together right now. His last one he didn't get to make was AI.
There you go.
We're looking into the future to talk about artificial intelligence and AI, and there's an uncanny valley there because it was just not real enough. And I don't know if we want it to be 100% real.
No, there's something deeply rooted in just interaction and writing your own resume and writing your own email, right? And far too many Facebook or LinkedIn posts, far too many emails you read are way too polished.
Ooh.
Yeah, that's it. We're going to have add another sense, another bullshit detector to keep our AI at a level too. I know we're not talking about privacy security necessarily, but you have to be your own best editor, right?
Yeah, and it's and it goes into the AI equation in a sense that at what point do we hit a wall in business where it switches from an AI conversation to a business conversation? Mm-hmm. and it's interesting because AI has the capability of taking over an entire business. Like you said, your daughter could write her own business tomorrow.
Yeah.
Can and should are two different things, and can and should are two different things in the business world right now. Should you?
Right.
Can you?
Yeah. I think that's a great place for us to kind of wrap this one up because
Absolutely.
you've teed up the next one.
There you
AI, when AI conversation becomes a business conversation.
Exactly.
As we mature. Let's look forward. Let's use our looking forward holodeck for the next one.
Absolutely.
Gentlemen, thank you both so much for your time this week. We'll be back again soon with more. And all of our references, as always, will be in the notes that we will include with the show notes. On YouTube, just look down there. Like, subscribe. You know the drill. Help us get some eyeballs.
Exactly.
Kevin, Bill, thanks a lot.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thanks, Bill.
All right.
Have a good one.
That's a wrap for this episode of Game on Privacy, where the intersection of AI, data privacy, and decentralized tech get the clarity it deserves. A huge thanks to Kevin Morgan for joining us and breaking down the real-world challenges and opportunities of managing privacy in an AI-driven world. From data broker power plays to AI-assisted policy approvals, this conversation laid bare the complexity and urgency of proactive privacy leadership. If today's episode resonated with you, share it with your team or drop a review in your favorite podcast platform. Don't forget to check out our show notes for key takeaways, quotes, and links to deeper resources. Until next time, I'm Bill Porter with co-host Jason Middleton. And remember, when it comes to privacy and AI, the game is always on.